Welcome to the podcast, Felicity. It's absolutely fantastic to have you on here today.
Thank you very much, Leslie. It's great to be here.
So I'm going to ask you the same question I ask all my guests. What is your money story?
My money story is really around my cancer diagnosis. And, when you go through a cancer diagnosis, the last thing you want to worry about is have financial pressures. And I suppose it was a lesson for me to make sure that you think about what kind of financial security you have if, worst case scenario, you get something like a cancer diagnosis where you're facing the prospect of not being able to work and your income will drop. And so one of the first people to get in touch with me when I posted after my surgery on social media about having cancer was my mortgage advisor. And it sounded really mercenary, but he said, "You've got protection. Make sure you look at your policy and get onto it." And I hadn't really thought about it. But actually, that was so helpful because it meant that, I knew that I was entitled to a chunk of money, which meant that I didn't worry about not being at work and how long I was going to be off work for, because I had this sort of financial security around me. And I remember when I first took out my mortgage, or when my husband and I first took out our mortgage, and you talk about life assurance and critical illness cover, and it seems like, it's such a distant thing. It's so separated from where you are at that point in time. You think, do I really need to be paying out this monthly premium? And you try and minimize it because you think, well, I'll never need that. And it's natural to think that way, but I am so grateful that our mortgage advisor, put a bit of pressure on us to take it out, because it saved us a huge amount of worry at a time when, as I say, you really don't want to have unnecessary worries on your plate. The main thing you need to concern yourself with is getting better at that point and not worrying about how you're going to make ends meet. And not having the pressure of having to go back to work really before you feel physically and mentally ready to do so. And so I think my message to anyone is make sure that you know what kind of measures that you've got in place on the off chance that you get something like a cancer diagnosis. And if you haven't got things in place, then put them in place, because don't run the risk of thinking, or don't risk thinking it wouldn't happen to me, because you just don't know what's coming around the corner. But not only from a sort of a mortgage protection perspective, also understanding what things you're entitled to, maybe through your workplace, and making sure that you do make the most of those things, because somewhere along the lines you're paying for them, or it's part of your remuneration, and they're there for you to make the most of them. So having things like private health insurance through work was also incredibly helpful, because even though most of my treatment was through the NHS, I had this level of sort of cash reimbursement through my private health policy, which just helps at a time when you need all the help you can get.
Yeah, I think
So it's
that,
being aware. Yeah,
sorry,
sorry. It's just being aware of what you're entitled to and making sure that you use it when it's there for you.
absolutely. And I think that is such a good point that you're making. And we're recording this podcast at a time when it is World Cancer Day, that 1 in 2 people will have a cancer diagnosis, it is said, in their lifetime. And I think the point that you made with regards to most people will bat away certain costs if they are not, intrinsically required. We know we need content insurance. We know we need building insurance. We know we have to have car insurance. But other insurances, particularly when you're buying a house at a time when you have so many expenses to
Yeah.
consider, something like that mortgage protection around what happens if, I think that is such an important message.
Yeah, because normally, I suppose, when you're taking out your first mortgage, it might be a bit of a struggle to make all the different payments. And you think, well, I could do away with that couple of £100 a month. What could I spend that on differently? And it's very tempting just to think, I'll be okay, or I'll self-insure, I'll put some money aside. And of
Yeah,
course, you never do.
no,
So yeah, I mean, the best piece of advice I was ever given was to take out that insurance.
yeah, amazing, absolutely amazing. I'd love now for you to talk about what you did in terms of rowing across the Atlantic. Is that right?
It is, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So share that story with me. What drove you to do that?
I suppose the blame lies really in the lap of my brother-in-law and my sister to a degree. My brother-in-law had rowed across the Atlantic 2 years before I did. And when I first heard about him doing it, I thought he was absolutely mad. I thought, why would you want to put yourself in a tiny boat in the middle of these massive waves? I mean, I just thought it was ridiculous. But when I started following his race on social media, I suppose it planted a seed and I got interested in it. And then watching him finish live on Facebook in the middle of the night was spine-tinglingly exciting. And at that point, I knew it was something I'd like to do. Um, I thought, but the kids are too young, not now, but not when I'm not so old, I can't physically do it. And then a couple of weeks later, my sister called me and she'd been out in Antigua to see her husband, David, finish. And she said, I've got a boat. Do you want to row the Atlantic? And I was like, don't be ridiculous. I can't do it. I've just had a hip replacement. The kids are too young. I can't leave them for that long. And she said to me, stop giving me reasons why you can't and start giving me reasons why you can.
Ooh.
And that resonated so much with me. It's such a simple piece of advice, but I put down the phone grinning from ear to ear because I just knew I was going to say yes. I just had to kind of convince my husband of the plan. Um, but it was so true. There's always a million reasons for saying no to something, and you just need to find that one reason why you can say yes. And so for me, having had a hip replacement, it wasn't a reason to say no. It was a reason to say yes,
Yeah.
actually, because I could do it. There's no reason why I couldn't anymore. Um, so yeah, so my sister and brother-in-law were really the reason that I decided to do it. And then, following that, there was a 2 year period of preparation training, um, a lot of physical training, but actually almost more than that is the logistical preparation. There's a huge money story in that in itself, in just how do you raise enough money to get to the start line itself, because that's a massive challenge. And actually, it's a reason why a lot of crews never actually make it to the start line. And then there was all sorts of other kind of preparation involved, like mandatory courses that we had to go on to make sure that we were safe and prepared for what is an intrinsically risky event if you're not prepared for it properly. So it was 2 years of hard work, but such a brilliant journey. I learned so much. Most of it was outside of our comfort zone, stuff that we'd never imagined doing at all. And it was just brilliant to learn new things at that point in my life and to have this amazing challenge, something that meant I had to dig deep and push myself to, my mental and physical limits.
And what was
Um,
the hardest point that you faced in terms of pushing yourself to those limits?
I think the hardest point was it was Christmas Eve was one of our first real tests. It was a bit like the nightmare before Christmas. Several things went wrong. We had our water maker broke during the day, so we had 2 hours where we were trying to take that apart and fix it. And then in the middle of the night, we met some of the first kind of big weather conditions. And I remember coming out onto deck for one of my shifts, and it was like all hell had broken loose. All the rest of the crew were all on deck, and the boat seemed to be turning and spinning out of control. And I think what had happened is a large wave had knocked our rudder off course and made the auto helm kind of go a bit haywire. We thought we'd actually broken the rudder somehow. And it was at that point I wasn't scared or worried about my life. It was more, are we going to be prevented from finishing this race because of a mechanical failure and something that was really out of our control? And I was just so scared that that would happen and we wouldn't be able to finish this thing that we'd been working towards for 2 years, because it would have just felt like so unfair
No, I
to
can
have put
imagine.
so much into it and for all of our families to have put so much into it and sacrificed so much not to have actually seen it through to the conclusion.
And how do you mentally prepare for something like that? Being away from your family, the physical challenge, the mental challenge. How do you prepare yourself? And how changed are you now as a person as a result?
I think the preparation was in all sorts of different areas, but if you think about the mental preparation, A lot of it was simply having 2 years to get your head slowly around the eye, the prospect of what we were about to do. And as I say, when I heard about my brother-in-law doing it, it absolutely terrified me. But one of the ways to, I suppose, allay those fears was to train really, really hard. It was about controlling my controllables so that I knew that I was as ready as I possibly could be. So a big part of that was getting as physically fit and strong as I possibly could be, because I knew then that my body wasn't going to be the weak link. It wasn't going to be the thing that let me down. There were things like learning how to tie knots, again, because in an emergency, you might need to be able to do one of those at the drop of a hat. And it was really important that I built up the muscle memory and knew how to do it so that that didn't become a thing that could let me down. So it was about training as hard as we possibly could physically, but also preparing mentally in every possible way, shape, or form, going through scenario planning, what would you do if X, Y, and Z happened? And I think it was going through all of those different things over the course of 2 years that really built our confidence, that we knew we could do it. There was loads that was out of our control, like the weather. I mean, that's the big unknown in
Yeah.
something like that. But if you are confident in your ability in all other ways, then it's so helpful. And towards the start, when it was in the few days leading up to the start, I kept thinking I wasn't feeling nervous, and I kept thinking I've been burying my head in the sand. It's going to hit me like a steam train one of these days. I'm going to wake up paralyzed with fear. And it never did, it never happened. And when we got to the start line and we were in the boat, it was just partly relief that we'd all made it to that point and that we were going to be able to start this thing. But it was also just a realization that all of that training had got us to this point and that I felt ready.
Mm.
I didn't get nervous because I knew at that point that I was ready. And all of the tasks and the courses you have to go on, and it feels like you're jumping through hoops at the time. You realize when you get to the start line and you do feel ready, you realize why you've had to do all those things
Mm.
and why it does take a couple of years to prepare for something like that.
And what was the camaraderie like between you and your teammates?
Oh, it was amazing. Our team mantra was stay safe, stay strong, and stay friends. A lot of people talk about you either, when you're entering something like that, you're either in it to compete or you're in it to complete. And I think from our perspective, it was neither really, actually. We were somewhere in between. We wanted to do the best we absolutely could. So we trained really hard and we got as fit as we could and everything else. But it was also really important to us that we enjoyed it. We didn't want to do it at the expense of everything else. And so we spent so much time working on teamwork and the camaraderie and really getting to understand each other as a crew. So we did personality profiling so that we understood how to communicate with each other, how individuals might react in different circumstances. We talked a lot about what our motivation was, and anticipating lots of lows as well as highs, what individually we needed to help pick ourselves up again. So, for example, my sister needs a hug when she's having a bad day. One of the crew, Lebby, loves a cup of tea when she's feeling down. So, having just those little tiny simple things in our armory really helped. And we did use them throughout the row. There were occasions when, I remember making a cup of tea for Lebs after she'd had a really bad night. And those things just helped us each individually feel that we were valued and seen and cared for. Um, and we just had a brilliant time. I mean, there were a couple of days when the tensions got the better of a couple of people, but we got over all of that because we had this collective desire to stay friends and get through it and have a brilliant time. And we shared stories, we laughed a lot. It was amazing being four working mums with barely a second to breathe, let alone to kind of sit and do nothing. It
Yeah.
was amazing to have that experience where all we had to think about was ourselves, really, and the three other people in the boat. We didn't have any of the normal distractions of normal life. And so you operate on a very different level and you have all of this time to talk about the really deep and meaningful stuff, but also to talk about utter rubbish and share
Yeah.
stupid stories. We'd play the game of looking at the clouds in the sky and seeing if we could see animals in the clouds. You had all this time just to do, just to be, and that was just brilliant about, reconnecting with with yourself, and then getting to know people on a completely different level. And it's a totally unique experience to share with people, and it formed a bond between us all that will never be broken. We meet up reasonably regularly, and it's just lovely to relive that kind of adventure with people who are now soulmates.
Which is absolutely amazing, and it doesn't happen very often.
No,
Remind me, how many days were you at sea for?
we were at sea for 40 days.
Long,
So
long time. Yeah.
it is a long time, yeah,
Mm.
best part of 6 weeks over Christmas and New Year. So, arguably a difficult time to be away from families. We'd set ourselves a goal of 45 days. So we were absolutely delighted to finish in 40 days. And actually, my brother-in-law's crew, who are a crew of five men, finished in 41 days. So that was the icing on the cake. Not that we're competitive or anything.
No, not at all, not at all. So
No.
tell me how it felt when you actually reached your destination on day 40. What was that feeling like?
It was unbelievable. I mean, so many different emotions. There was, I suppose, a tinge of regret slash nostalgia that this incredible adventure was over. I think probably most of us would have paused time if we could a couple of days before the end just to savor what we were doing, but knowing we were so close. But it was absolutely incredible knowing we'd done something that at the time I think fewer than 250 women in the world had ever done. And we weren't just proud of what we'd achieved, but also how we'd gone about doing it. We'd overcome so many different challenges to get there that it felt like even more of an achievement. But also knowing when we'd crossed that line that we are about to be reunited with our 11 children, that was just so exciting. And having been at sea for 40 days, you really don't see, well, you don't see anyone else apart from the people in your boat. You don't really hear anything much apart from the sounds of the sea and the sounds of each other. And to come round the corner into Nelson's Dockyard in Antigua, we came in early evening in the dusk, and suddenly we were surrounded by a media boat blaring out music with lots of people shouting and taking photos and filming us. And then there were super yachts blasting their horns. And we rode past a restaurant, and all of the diners stopped and all of the staff stopped and came out and cheered us and played We Are the Champions. And it honestly felt like we were somewhere between superheroes and celebrities. It
Yeah.
was the most incredible welcome. And then all of our families and supporters were standing there cheering us in. It was just absolutely brilliant. I mean, something that we'll never ever forget.
And do you think you will do anything similar to that again? Do you
That's the
want to
question.
even?
That's the question that everybody asks. I would love to do something similar again. I said at the time, this is the once in a lifetime achievement. I hope it's not now a once in a lifetime thing, because I absolutely loved every single second of it. Honestly, there wasn't a second that I didn't want to be on the boat. Yes, there were hard times and times when it was pretty scary, times when things hurt, but there wasn't a single second I didn't want to be there doing it. Um, and so I would love to think that at some point in the future there will be another challenge, whether it's the same or a very similar thing, I don't know, but I'd love to think there's another challenge in me somewhere.
And you've gone through a lot in your lifetime, from the cancer diagnosis, the recovery from cancer, the challenge itself that you have done. How has that changed your life in terms of what you're doing now?
It's just opened so many different doors. I think the row obviously has taught me so much about, my mental and physical resilience. And although I knew before that I was pretty tough, that was a massive test of it. And it really proved to me how resilient I am. And I very much took that into my cancer diagnosis. My attitude was, well, I've rode the Atlantic. I'm not going to let this take me down. And also I took a lot of that resilience and approached the cancer diagnosis and treatment in, I suppose, in a very similar way. um And then I suppose the cancer diagnosis was really a bit of a catalyst for me. It felt like life was trying to tell me something. And I'd always wanted to use the row in some way and it not to become a relic on a shelf, a distant memory that we relived once a year when meeting up with the crew. And I suppose the cancer diagnosis made me stop and think about what I could or should be doing. And it's such an unusual story. I felt compelled really to share the cancer element of it because I'm about the last person you would have imagined to be diagnosed with cancer. I was
Yeah.
literally fitter and stronger than I'd ever been in my life. And certainly in terms of cancer, I was young at 46. And I felt the need to share that with people to show that it really can affect anybody at any stage of their life and not to fall into the trap of thinking it won't happen to me and to be complacent about it. And I also felt this need to kind of pay it forward. Um, During the row, one of the other crews during the row were rowing in memory of the skipper's wife who died of bowel cancer when she was 37. And Ed, the skipper, would post regularly about the symptoms of bowel cancer. And their mission as a couple before she died was if they could prevent one other person having the same fate, then their mission would be complete, if you like. And somewhere in my subconscious, I must have remembered those posts because I recognized my symptoms as things that could be the symptoms of bowel cancer. And I honestly think it could have changed my prognosis and outcome, having read his posts. So for that reason alone, I just felt really compelled to share my story because in the same way, if it can help somebody else not have to go through, an awful prognosis, and if my story can help other people approach a similar story in a positive manner, then it's all worthwhile.
And that's amazing, isn't it? That potentially the row, the challenge, had a hand in possibly saving your life.
Yeah, yeah,
And I didn't know that part of your story. And that's just hit me hard thinking you put yourself through a huge physical challenge, but that allowed you to have more information with regards to the challenge that was to come that you were to face. So
yeah.
that is just amazing. How do you manage that in terms of the what ifs? The what if I hadn't have done the challenge?
I sometimes think about that and then I push it to one side because it's almost not worth thinking about. I think about what if I'd been diagnosed before the row? What would I have done then? And it's just such a horrible prospect to think about. I don't like to think about it.
Yeah.
I think I would have had taken a different approach if I hadn't done the row. Um, the row was so helpful in so many different ways. It primarily, I suppose, in that I knew that I was tough as old boots, and I didn't want it to all have been in vain. I didn't want to have had 2 months away from my family to then, to
Park
then,
it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, and it gave me this courage and determination to get through it, and to come out fighting the other side. And as I say, it has opened so many different doors because I'm now using it as an opportunity to speak about it. And it's changed my life in so many different ways, but not from a cancer perspective, not for the worse at all.
Yeah. And that's obviously how we met each other, is through the opportunity to speak on stage about the topics that we want to talk about. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, so since last year, I've been speaking professionally. I've got a sort of 25 years or so of corporate marketing experience, so leading teams for some of the UK's biggest companies. And so what I talk about now is I bring together my corporate background because I understand what businesses, challenges businesses are facing. And I bring together that corporate background with my more recent kind of adventure and cancer experiences and relate how the lessons I've learned through the row and the cancer relate to business challenges. Um, And it's, you know, from an audience perspective, it's an inspiring story to hear. But from a business perspective, there are so many lessons that you can take back to the workplace around resilience, overcoming adversity, you know, the power of team working. And also there's a massive well-being angle as well. You know, it's so important from a workplace perspective and from an employer perspective to support employees in terms of looking after their mental and physical well-being, because that has a huge impact, not only on the individuals themselves, but also on you know, productivity, on staff attrition versus loyalty.
Yeah.
There are so many financial benefits to organizations in looking after well-being, let alone the personal benefits to individuals
Absolutely. You're speaking
looking
my
after yourself.
language. Absolutely. Because I speak to companies about financial well-being for very, very similar reasons in terms of the productivity, the attrition, being able for people to feel that they are supported, being able to feel they can open up when they have a problem and don't have to have a stiff upper lip approach, etc.
Yeah.
But I think the what you're doing in terms of creating this conversation, you know, around first of all going for your dreams, that you choose your hard to a certain extent,
Yeah.
but also utilizing that resilience, utilizing all that went before the 2 year planning, etc., and then taking that into the challenge you had around cancer and making people, you know, aware that we have to look after ourselves. We have to be looking out for the symptoms. We have to not be shy about telling the right people, you know, what's going on for us, because that could actually be responsible for saving our lives.
Yeah. Yeah,
And I think that,
absolutely.
yeah, and I think that is such, you know, a massively important part of what you are doing. So when you are speaking to those audiences, what kind of questions are they asking you? What are you opening up for them?
All manner of different questions. I mean, a lot of people have very, I suppose, basic questions about the logistics of the row. Where do you sleep? What do you eat? Where do you go to the loo? All sorts of things like that. Um, People also ask almost about that what if scenario, you know, and how they feel the row helped me through the cancer, and would I have felt differently about it had I not done the row? Um, how do you, I suppose, how do you keep so positive? Is one of the big questions. And I think it helps people reevaluate their own attitude and perspective on challenges that they might be facing, whether they're challenges from a personal perspective, so potentially health challenges, or whether they're challenges in the workplace. Because part of what I talk about is this power of reframing and having a growth mindset. And you need to learn how to reframe challenges as opportunities, because even the worst things, there can be some light at the end of the tunnel. There can be positives that you can find in them. And you just need to look for those things, because those are the reasons to keep you going and to get you through. So I think it really helps people just reframe all sorts of different things that might be going on in their lives at the time, whether, as they say, it's whether it's in their personal lives or in their corporate lives. And I've also had a lot of feedback about very simple things that people can do differently from that day forward. For example, around well-being, you know, different habits that they can start doing, or 10 minutes of yoga or stretching every day. It doesn't have to be the big stuff. It doesn't have to be training to row an ocean or running a marathon, or, you know, lifting a huge number of kilos every day. It's the small steps that each person can start to take to build better well-being habits. And I think those are some of the simple, really simple, easy things that people can put into practice straight away.
No, I totally agree with you. Absolutely. It is definitely with anything, isn't it? It is not trying to eat the whole elephant. It's
Yeah.
trying to take little chunks basically to make
Yeah.
it manageable. And apologies if you are a vegetarian, that wasn't a really good example to use. Why an elephant came to mind, I have absolutely no idea. So, how did your children respond to you doing the row across the Atlantic?
Um, My children, so at the time, my children were 4, 6, and 8, and my 8-year-old turned 9. They were the youngest of, as a crew, of our children. And in some ways, it was almost easier for me to do it when they were young because they didn't really appreciate the concept of time. So I was away from home for 2 months. Um, and I think that was a difficult thing for the older children to get their heads around, especially when they knew it's Christmas and New Year. But my kids, I mean, once I was away, and they got used to a new routine. And it could have been 6 days, it could have been 6 months. It didn't feel that different for them, and they didn't get what 2 months meant for them. And so, in that way, I think it was a lot easier. Yes, they had more physical needs that needed taking care of. So my husband had to, you know, uh, do all the hard work on that side of things. But mentally and psychologically, I think it was easier for me having younger children. Um, they were really proud. I think they enjoyed being in the limelight as well. So, for example, at school, the teachers made a big deal out of it. They followed us on the what's called the YB tracker. And I think they felt a little bit like celebrities at school because Mummy was rowing the Atlantic. Um, they don't talk about it a huge amount, but sometimes they'll just randomly drop it into a conversation when you're not even talking about anything related to it. And I know then how proud they are. Um, but it was quite funny. If I ask them, or if anyone asks them what was the best thing about Mummy rowing the Atlantic, they'll tell you it was going to Antigua and having a holiday with their cousins and the buffet breakfasts in the hotel.
It's funny
But
how buffet breakfasts do play a big part in young
yeah,
children's lives. Yeah.
yeah. But I know that in time they will see it for the achievement that it was. And I think the best thing for us, and it was the thing that united us as a crew, we wanted to inspire our children and to encourage them to dream big and show them that ordinary people like us can do extraordinary things. You need the right mindset, you need a good deal of hard work. But we wanted them to grow up knowing that nothing was out of reach and that they literally can do anything they want to, and not to be constrained by society's expectations of them in any way.
I love that. I love that. I think that is a great place to ask you the question, how can people connect with you, Felicity?
I have a website, which is felicityashley.com, fairly easy to remember, and LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Felicity Ashley on LinkedIn. So please do get in touch. Drop me a message on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from anybody. And if I can help anybody in any way, shape, or form, then I'd really love to.
That's amazing. And all those details will be in the show notes so people can easily connect with you. And I recommend that everybody does. Thank you for your time today.
Thank
The
you.
conversation has been really, really inspirational and motivational as well. And it's just been lovely to get to know you a little bit more and hear more of your story. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Leslie.